Let's be clear, the Pelicans are not trading away Zion Williamson, but I'll explain why it's better to start a potential rebuild sooner rather than later, plus how the Pelicans can leverage Bruce Brown Jr., and let's look at Danny Wolf as a draft profile. It's all on the Wednesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Wednesday. And we're going to talk a little bit about trading Zion, but more in the context of a larger rebuild. And I'm going to answer one or two questions that kind of came up from the potential trade I put out yesterday in our Locked On NBA mock draft. We're going to look at a Bruce Brown Jr. sign-in trade and why that is going to be a really important potential move for the Pelicans this offseason. We're going to get into the Pelicans salary cap situation in the next segment with that. Then we'll look at Danny Wolf as an option for the 7th pick and what his, expectations are going to be in the NBA. He's an interesting prospect. He might be the most requested guy, I think, that people have wanted me to talk about on the show that we haven't so far. So we're going to look at him and just talk about it. We got a lot to cover in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today into every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. If you're an everydayer, it means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below, and I appreciate you. So here's my note for this first segment as I was planning out the show. It's better to start a rebuild sooner rather than later. So we're going to kind of focus on the Zion Williamson trade here. I think the big piece that people really did not like about that deal was about giving up the draft pick next season. Whether it's the Bucks pick or the Pelicans pick, that was really the sticking point for a lot of people. And I understand that. But I'm going to be honest, I'm less worried about that given that you have 5 and 7 in this draft, and this draft is considered very, very good. I'll basically what it comes down to is I'll take my chances on these players this year, and Zion does not have a lot of value around the league. Now, this is all a moot point, so we're not going to belabor the point with this. It's a fake mock Zion Williamson trade here. They're not trading him, right? When they marched him up there for the NBA draft lottery, that was to send a message about things. So all of this is just a thought experiment, kind of playing devil's advocate. No, it's the offseason. We're talking about things. Let's find things to talk about. If you were at a bar and your buddy was like, here's my trade for Zion, you'd go back and forth, and that's kind of what we're doing here with it. So I'll take my chances with these players this year. In this case, it's Jeremiah Fears and Colin Knippel. And a lot of y'all were saying too many guards coming back. Jeremiah Fears, Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson. Yeah, but the point is not to keep all of those guys, right? And if you think that pick next year is going to be very valuable, and it could, who knows if the Pelicans will be good or not, and in this hypothetical scenario, not having Zion, as I've said, I do think it lowers your overall ceiling for the team next year. But if Zion doesn't play or only plays 50 games, I don't know if that's going to get you where you want to be overall. And that's kind of the point of it, and I'll explain that here in a second, right? But also, even if you're bad, we've seen that being in the top 4 doesn't guarantee that you're getting a top 4 pick. That's what happened this year, falling 3 spots to 7, right? We've seen that a little bit the past couple of years. Utah being #1, dropping 4 spots. We've seen that happen to the Detroit Pistons in that awful year that they had. They didn't get #1 over a pick. They got the 5th pick after losing 27, 28 straight games. So you're starting to see the value of some of those top 4 picks be a little bit less than what they would have been in the past. And no team right now, the Utah Jazz would not trade you that 5th pick they have this year for that pick next year. They won't do that because it's a big unknown. So it's kind of a bird in hand situation when it comes to it. But let's say you keep Zion, he plays 56 games, and you just miss the playoffs next season. You're looking at the 10 to 14th pick next year, right? That doesn't help you even with the 7th pick this year. I'd rather 5 this year. Because if Zion only plays 56 games and you miss the playoffs next year, they're going to trade Zion Williamson at that point. I feel very confident in that this is 1 year to prove it. And if you don't get there, they're going to make bigger moves. Trading him in a year isn't going to raise his value up any higher than whatever it is right now. And I don't think it's insanely high. So if someone's going to offer me the 5th pick and you need my future first next year, that's fine. And I'm just not going to tank next year and try and be as good as possible. But it's also, I think a lot of people are missing out on this point that's really important. And we'll get more into it in the next segment when it comes to the salary cap too. It's also about the flexibility that deal creates with the expiring salary of Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson. Now, you can also flip those guys, right? I think the Celtics, the Orlando Magic, and a few other teams, probably the Milwaukee Bucks too, would have very genuine interest, probably do have very genuine interest in Colin Sexton and being able to move him. So you might be able to turn him into another first-round pick this draft or another one. So that kind of adds to the return that you're getting for Zion Williamson. Same thing with Jordan Clarkson. But even if you don't move them, their expiring salary is important because the Pelicans don't have a ton of ways to improve this team this offseason. They don't have a ton of ways to improve it going forward. They're, as of now, I can tell you, and we'll get into this more a little bit next, they're $4.3 million away from the luxury tax. As of right now, with 14 players on the roster, you add a 15th to that, you're going to get even closer, even on a vet minimum at $2 million, puts you $2.3 million away from the luxury tax. You're not adding salary in that case, and so thus it's not easy to improve the team, improve the roster here. But even if Colin Sexton expires, if Jordan Clarkson expires, Kelly Olynyk expires, even CJ McCollum expires, all of a sudden you have like $65 million plus. More than that, it's probably closer to like 78, 75, something like that, of cap space or flexibility. It wouldn't be exactly 70 million. It'd be probably in the 50 million range. There's no teams with cap space. There's one this year. That's important. And you don't use that cap space to sign guys in free agency. Use that cap space to take on bad contracts and have teams attach picks to it. This is what the Oklahoma City Thunder have done. And this is also why, even with the best record in the league, they're flush with draft picks. You look at a lot of the guys that are contributors to them, Jalen Williams, J-Dub being their second best player. He wasn't drafted with an OKC pick. He was drafted with a Clippers pick. It's from the Paul George trade, so it's not exactly proving my point. But you get all of those picks to draft guys, right, and improve your team that way too. You don't do that if you keep Zion Williamson. You don't do that unless you move for expiring salary and kind of set yourself up to be just a clean slate, and the Pelicans aren't going to be in that position for a while now. So even if you are good next year, you're still kind of in this cap crunch going forward that's going to present a problem to you. So I think if you trade Zion, say it's this deal or something else, and you get a bunch of expiring salary and a young guy back, Jeremiah Fears in this case, pair him with Con Knipple, you'll be able to get more draft picks in the future. And I think that's an important thing. So if you're like, well, that pick could be valuable. Yeah, but you could also still be able to get 2-3 picks in next year's draft, like very easily at that point in time, because you're going to be one of the few teams, one of the only 2-3 that are able to take on some contracts like that and have teams attach draft picks to it. You want all the Celtics picks going forward, you're going to be able to get that from them because they're going to have to attach those to try and trade players away. So keep that in mind with anything. But like I said, it's a moot point because they're not trading Zion Williamson. Can feel very confident based on some conversations I've had recently about that sort of thing. But I think it's an interesting thought experiment, thought exercise with it. Now that we're kind of done with that, we'll get through it when we do our mock draft here a little bit more. But we're also going to focus on kind of building around Zion Williamson going forward here on Locked On Pelicans because, final point I want to make on this, and I got a little longer in this segment than I meant to, is, when you start that rebuild sooner rather than later, if you do it in a year from now and trade Zion, you're not going to get the same kind of draft pick. You won't get a top 5 pick, I don't think. The Utah Jazz have had such bad luck recently, they need to kind of make this sort of swing. You don't see very many teams being interested in taking on Zion Williamson and giving you a top 5 pick for him. That's worth keeping in mind of, it's an opportunity cost. Yeah, you could wait for something, maybe better, but if it doesn't come along, you can't go back and get another deal like that. So keep that in mind when it comes to it. And, I'd rather get this rebuild over with sooner rather than later. Just do it sooner. You're going to see a lot of these teams tear themselves down, and the Pelicans can be coming out of their rebuild right as that's happening and kind of lead the charge on like that next wave of teams, the next guard coming up. And that's worth keeping in mind too. So coming up next, we said limited ways to improve the team. We'll go into the salary cap situation here, but there is an asset they can use that you might not have thought about, and that's a Bruce Brown Jr. signing trade. Let's break that down and what that could be, what that could look like. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, you know what time it is? Playoff season, and that means big performances and even bigger rewards. So DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more, use code WINGSTOP50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Look, I love ordering in. It's easy, it's great, but sometimes that adds up really quickly. All of those additional fees and things like that. But with Dash Pass, you get $0 delivery fees and exclusive perks like this one. Think about how much you could save over the course of a season. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. And when any player scores 50 or more in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 or more order and code WINGSTOP50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So we just kind of went over. I'm interested in fixing the Pelicans salary cap kind of going forward because I don't think it's particularly great. They did some work on cleaning it up by trading Brandon Ingram. That was a big part of that trade deadline deal to move him, in my opinion. But they still have some work to do. You know, this team as it's constructed, look, I want them to pay the luxury tax eventually. I do have a hard time being able to justify it for the team that they currently have. So you want to clear room from that, right? Right now, as it stands, they can really only add $4.3 million in salary to the team. That's not even a quarter of the mid-level exception that they could use in free agency. Essentially what this means is they're going to sit free agency out. They might do one or two little things, but nothing pretty significant here. And I don't know, it's not a great thing. Right now, your roster is Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Kelly Olynyk, Jordan Hawkins, Alvarado, Yves Missi, Carlo Makovich, Antonio Reeves, Elfrid Payton, Brandon Boston Jr., and the 7th pick in the draft. What's the ceiling on that team right now? It's like an 8th seed, something like that. You know, maybe 6 if they're fully healthy. And that's going to be, you know, the biggest swing thing for New Orleans this year. But I wouldn't call it like an insanely high ceiling right now with it. Depends on who you draft and how that could change things and, you know, how many games Zion Williamson plays. But not having Murray for the first beginning part of the season isn't great. And you're almost a luxury tax team, which means, again, you have very limited ways to actually improve your roster. If you try and trade CJ and his $30 million contract, you're not going to bring a guy back that's $35 million. Right? That can limit the options that you have here. So adding that flexibility back to the Pelicans cap sheet is something that is a priority to me. Now, you can do a few things to make it a little bit easier. You could get Elfrid Payton's on an unguaranteed deal. You could waive him. That gives you $7.4 million to the luxury tax. You know, you could then move on, waive Brandon Boston Jr. at $2.3 million, though I think he's probably worth keeping at that contract. Payton maybe not. So you have some room there to try and upgrade your roster by trading somebody, but you're still limited. And that's not, again, even the full mid-level exception here. So you're going to need to get somewhat creative, right? One of the ways they can do that is with a Bruce Brown Jr. signing trade, but only up to that 4.3, 7 point something million dollars, depending on how much room do they have the luxury tax, because they won't go over that number. Like I said, it was part of why I was interested in trading Zion, of clearing that for expiring salary. So using Bruce Brown Jr. is a way to use an asset to get something else to help improve your team. And I think that's going to be worthwhile for them to look at doing. This goes back to something that I said a little bit earlier in the show, and that is a lack of cap space around the league. No teams really have cap space, which means trying to, free agency. The everydayers have heard me say this for a little while now. Teams don't trade, okay, hold on. Let me regather myself because that was terrible. Players, there we go, don't really change teams like big name players in free agency anymore. They used to, but they don't really anymore. And so when you see that, it's done through sign-in trades and things like that, or extending trades, right? It's not 2010 anymore where it's like, we want expiring salary so we can sign LeBron James, Amari Stoudemire, Carmelo Anthony, he was traded before, Chris Bosh and all of that stuff. Teams kind of acquire their big name players in other ways now. Paul George is very much an outlier for this past year when it came down to it. So no teams use cap space because that's not how it's done anymore. But that means there's like a squeeze on trying to acquire players. So Bruce Brown Jr. as a free agent can't really get a $20 million contract necessarily because no teams have $20 million to spend. So you need teams like the Pelicans and others to help facilitate signing trades using their bird rights, which allows you to go over the cap to sign guys. That's how Bruce Brown Jr. can get a $20 million deal. But if you're trading away Bruce Brown Jr. $20 million and you're technically the only team that can offer him that money before the other team, acquires him, well then you need to send something back in return. This is a way that the Pelicans can get a $4 million player, let's say, a $7 million player that they wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. And I think that's needed for this team. I just asked you, what's the ceiling on this roster? And I don't know if it's particularly great, but if you could add a $7 million player in there that you wouldn't have been able to add otherwise, that's not an available free agent, whether it's a point guard or something else, I think that is definitely worth looking at and doing here. And that's something that New Orleans is going to have to try and figure out, because the point guard market out there is not great in terms of guys that are actually going to be available for the team. So you're going to need to improve this roster through trades. Free agency this year is not particularly great. There's a few guys, but it's not unbelievable here, right? And so, if Chris Paul wants a full mid-level exception deal, he's probably the best unrestricted free agent point guard that, you could go and get. Well, then if that's going to be the case, you don't have the money to sign him for that right now. So maybe it's a sign and trade where Chris Paul comes this way and Bruce Brown Jr. goes to the Spurs. Maybe it's a 3-team deal. That sign and trade option is something that at least New Orleans has in their back pocket. If a team like Denver wants to bring back Bruce Brown Jr. and put him into maybe a more proper role for them, they're going to need to send something to New Orleans, whether that's a player, whether that's a draft pick, whatever it is, it's a way to get something. And New Orleans needs to probably build some better depth on this team. I don't want to rely on Brandon Boston Jr. I like Antonio Reeves, but don't want to rely on him just yet. Carlo Makovich is still a work in progress, right? You could use another backup big. This is a way to get one of those players when you wouldn't be able to get them otherwise. And so this is a decent asset in some capacity for the New Orleans Pelicans. So hopefully Bruce Brown Jr., this is what you're hoping for. You want Bruce Brown Jr. to have a lot of interest around the league, because that's only going to help New Orleans get a better return on him. And thus it's going to make that Brandon Ingram trade look a little bit better. But right now, the Pelicans salary cap is not particularly great still, given the lack of depth that they have. If you're relying on Kelly Olynyk as your 6th highest paid player to give you the 6 most minutes on this team, I don't feel great about that, right? They need to add some more to this team if they want to be better than a play-in tournament team, even when Zion's healthy. Zion will take you far. Absolutely. And we're expecting a big jump from Trey Murphy this season. But with Murray not being available right away, that's going to hurt, and you're going to need to figure some things out. And they don't have a lot of ways to go about doing that right now. And you don't necessarily want to rely on a rookie to kind of be the savior. That's not going to set them up for success at all. So hopefully Bruce Brown Jr. has a big market out there. I don't know if he does or not, but if he does, that's a good thing for the New Orleans Pelicans. So coming up next, Danny Wolf from Michigan. Too risky for 7, but he's an interesting player. We'll see where he could be drafted. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And we come in every day. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For the Saints QB battle heating up, Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints. I saw him on a Zoom call the other day. It was great. Makes me happy. He is covering everything black and gold, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make Locked On Saints your second listen today. So Danny Wolf out of Michigan. This is a guy that is intriguing as a player. Fully agree. Where he's got some type of like unicorn skill sets here. Absolutely does. But his production's kind of odd. And at 7th overall, you can't take him there. This is if the Pelicans were to trade back into the first round later, let's say. You look at drafting a guy like this, or potentially in the an early second round pick. But the Pelicans don't have a second round pick in this draft. But he's interesting, right? He's a 7-footer that basically played point guard for Michigan last season. And his numbers are intriguing. 13.2 points per game, 9.7 rebounds, 3.6 assists, 1.4 blocks. He shot 33.6% from the field. From 3, 50% from the field. Gets to the line a good bit too. So he rebounds, he passes, and he can shoot a little bit. So they're all good. And he's 7 feet tall. It's pretty good, right? Played 2 years in the Ivy League with Yale first before transferring to Michigan. Played 37 games for them last season. You know, there's a few things he does well as a point forward, kind of point center. I don't know. That's great. And the slick passing from your big man's important. And I think when you look around the league right now, one of the trends that we're seeing, and I've talked about this on the show, so the everydayers know this, is you need a variety of big men to throw different looks out there. You just need the tall, big, bulky dude. You need a lob finisher, a la Yves Missi, right? You need a shot blocker. You need one that can defend in space. You need one that probably isn't good defending in space and is your rim protector. You need one that can shoot. You know, if you can find them all in one player, that's better, but you've got to be able to throw different bigs out there to keep teams off balance. You've seen that very much in the playoffs. Look at Isaiah Hartenstein and then Chet Holmgren, 2 very different kind of big men that are equally both, probably Chet more so, to their team and the success that they have. Randall and Gobert, different kinds of big men. You see this on almost every single team and how important that is, right? Horford and Porzingis, different type of big men. Mitchell Robinson and Karl Anthony Towns, different kind of big men. I could go on and on. You need that variety to throw different looks out there and just figure out exactly what it is that you need. So Wolf fits into that for the Pelicans, where they don't have anyone like him here, kind of. So a 7-footer who can shoot a little bit and can be a good passer and facilitator sounds great. I have a couple of problems with him though, right? This dude just loves to turn the ball over. When you look at some of the passes he makes, these are very, very risky passes. And it's evidenced by him turning the ball over 3.2 times per game last season. The year before that, it was 2.3 per game at Yale. And his turnover percentage this year in college was 21.5%. So what that means is basically greater than 1 out of every 5 times he kind of touched the ball, he turned it over. you're not going to get on an NBA court really for very long if that's the case. So this is a player that does need to improve in that area, that he just turns it over. And I think part of that is he wants to make some of these slick, flashy passes that just don't work. And at the NBA level, it's definitely not going to work, right? His shooting could be there. It also could not, right? He has not been a consistent three-point shooter at any point in his collegiate career. For his career in 3 years, this is someone who's shooting 33.6% from three. On pretty decent enough volume for who he is and what he is. That doesn't make me think he's going to become a good shooter at the NBA level. Even his free throw percentage, right, was under 60% last season. In 3 years of college, his free throw percentage is 64.6%. His release is slow and also kind of low, which, look, if you're going to be a 7-footer, get a high release point so that it's basically unblockable. And that's a really important thing. So his mechanics on it aren't great. Like, he hits some of these pull-up and step-back threes at a very high rate, but you don't want him regularly taking those at the NBA level. He's also limited in terms of athleticism. He's not going to be great guarding on the perimeter, and he'll be able to be attacked very much so one-on-one in any sort of space. And he's not an elite rim protector or anything like that. I don't know what his role is on defense. I have an idea of what his role is on offense, but this is also not someone who plays and bangs down low and is more of a finesse five. I don't know maybe you need that kind of guy. I also want someone who actually does dunk a little bit, and that's not something that Danny Wolf does. But he does create space for himself at the collegiate level to get his shot off, and that's saying something. The other thing that I think is really great about him is he's a hustle guy. This is someone who's going to be out there running, working his butt off. He works really well off ball too by cutting. That's useful. To me, he screams end of first round, early second round. So 7th overall is far too risky in my opinion for him, but he does give the Pelicans a different kind of look than they would have otherwise. And that is something that is very much needed on this team from a depth and big man perspective. Let me know what you think about Danny Wolf from Michigan down in the comments below. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. We're going to be talking some more draft. We'll be looking at ways for the team to improve and build around Zion because they're not trading him. All of that and more the rest of the week here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See y'all next time.